And welcome to College Football Opening Lines. I'm Ramon Scott coming to you from the sports betting capital of the world, Las Vegas, where the Circa is beginning to release their opening lines for this week's college football. Now, we do have some measurement here because DraftKings had lines open on several games. So let's start to get into it right now and get right to the action because these lines have started to get released with early line moves as well. Let's take a look. First of all, we have two games that are being played on Wednesday. Jacksonville State is at Middle Tennessee. These will all be in rotation order. When we get to that point, it's more important, but here just starting off 301 and 302. Jacksonville State and Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee opened a 4-point favorite. They are now up to a 6-point favorite. The total opened 55.5 and was bet down to 52.5. Florida International at New Mexico State. New Mexico State opened 4 and it's still 4. The total opened 47.5. It is now 49. On Thursday, two games in college football. Sam Houston is at Liberty. Liberty opened 17. They are now 18. The total for Sam Houston and Liberty opened 49.5, and it's now 48. Western Kentucky and Louisiana Tech. Western Kentucky opened -9, and it was bet down to -8. The total opened 55.5 and was immediately bet up to 59.5. Western Kentucky and Louisiana Tech. On Friday, there were two games, including one on a time change. Kansas State and Oklahoma State is now at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific. Now, DraftKings opened Kansas State -9, and it was bet up to 9.5. Circa opened Kansas State 9, and it was bet up to 10. Nebraska and Illinois. DraftKings opened at 3.5, and it was bet to 2.5. Circa just opened the game Illinois 4, and it was bet down to 3. Offshore book catering to squares just opened this game up as well at 2.5. Move to Saturday's action now. And we'll start with 319, 320. Central Florida and Kansas. This game is now at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Kansas opened 3 at DraftKings, was bet up to 4. Circa opened the game 5 for Kansas, and it was bet down to 3. Total opened 61.5. One offshore book splits the difference, they'll call it at 4.5. Marshall at NC State. NC State opened 7.5 at DraftKings. It was bet down to 7. Circa opened the game 7 for NC State. It was bet down to 6.5. Total opened 46.5, and that's where it stays. Marshall and NC State is now at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Vanderbilt and Florida. DraftKings opened Florida 19.5. It was bet down to 18. Circa opened at 17. It was bet up to 19. So we're sitting right in that range right now, 18.5 or so. Vanderbilt and Florida is now at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific. Syracuse and North Carolina. DraftKings opened North Carolina 7.5. It was bet up to 8.5. Circa opened North Carolina 9. It was bet down to 8.5. Circa opened the total 56.5. It was bet up to 57.5. I mentioned Vanderbilt and Florida. Vanderbilt, the total opened 51.5 and was bet up to 53. Also, Syracuse and North Carolina is now at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Toledo and Massachusetts. Toledo opened 17. They were bet up to 19. Toledo and Massachusetts, the total opened 54.5 and was bet up to 59.5. Kentucky and Georgia. DraftKings opened Georgia minus 17. It was bet down to 16. Circa opened the game 14. It was bet up to 15. Kentucky and Georgia total opened 44.5. It was bet up to 48.5. Kentucky and Georgia will now be at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Boston College and Army. DraftKings opened the game Army 4. It was bet down to 3.5. Circa opened the game 3. It was bet up to 4. The total on Boston College and Army opened 51.5, and it was bet up to 53. Notre Dame and Louisville. DraftKings opened Notre Dame 6.5. That's where it stayed. Circa opened the game 6. They're still 6. Total opened 53.5 and was bet down to 52.5 in the Notre Dame Louisville game. Notre Dame and Louisville is now at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific. Wake Forest and Clemson. DraftKings opened the game 20.5, and that's where it stays. Circa opened the game 19. It was bet up to 20. Wake Forest and Clemson total opened 51.5, and it was bet up to 52.5. Wake Forest and Clemson is now at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Georgia Tech and Miami. DraftKings opened Miami minus 16. It was bet up to 18.5. Circa opened the game 23, and it was bet down to 19. Big discrepancy there. Georgia Tech total against Miami opened 58.5. It was bet up to 61. Georgia Tech and Miami is now at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Virginia Tech and Florida State. DraftKings opened Florida State 29. It was bet all the way down to 25.5. Circa opened the game 25 and is now bet to 24. Pretty strong move here on Virginia Tech in this one off the openers. The total opened 50.5. It is now 53. Virginia Tech and Florida State is now at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Tulsa and Florida Atlantic. Florida Atlantic opened 4. It's now Florida Atlantic 3. Total in Tulsa and Florida Atlantic opened 57.5. It is now 54. Tulsa and Florida Atlantic is now at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. North Texas and Navy. Navy opened 5. It stayed 5. Total opened 54.5. It is now 60.5. North Texas and Navy is now at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Texas San Antonio and Temple. Texas San Antonio opened 12. It was bet up to 13. The total in Texas San Antonio opened 54.5. It is now 57.5. Texas San Antonio and Temple is now at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Northern Illinois and Akron. Northern Illinois opened 6. It's now Northern Illinois 3.5. Total in Northern Illinois and Akron opened 44.5. It is now 47.5. Northern Illinois and Akron is now at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Central Michigan and Buffalo. Central Michigan opened 2. It's still 2. The total in Central Michigan and Buffalo opened 55.5. It is now 58. Central Michigan and Buffalo is now at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Ball State and Eastern Michigan. Eastern Michigan opened 3. It's now 2.5. The total in Ball State and Eastern Michigan opened 44.5. It's now 45.5. Ball State and Eastern Michigan is now at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Bowling Green and Miami of Ohio. Miami O opened 11. They're now 13. Bowling Green and Miami O total opened 46.5. It is now 49.5. Bowling Green and Miami of Ohio is now at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Kent and Ohio. Ohio opened 24 and was bet up to 26. The total in Kent State and Ohio opened 52.5 and is now down to 47. Kent State and Ohio is now at 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. LSU and Missouri. DraftKings opened this one 6.5. Circa opened at 6. It moved to 6.5. It's 6.5 everywhere. The total opened 64.5. It's still 64.5. Oklahoma and Texas. This one's in Dallas. DraftKings opened it up Texas minus 5.5. It was bet up to 6. It is now back down to 5.5. Circa opened the game Texas 5. It's now down to 4.5 at Circa. The total in Oklahoma and Texas opened 62.5. It is now 60. Maryland and Ohio State. Ohio State opened 19 at DraftKings. They're still 19. It opened 20 at Circa. It's still 20. Total opened 52.5 for Maryland and Ohio State. It is now 54.5. TCU and Iowa State. DraftKings opened TCU 4.5. It was bet up to 5.5. Circa opened the game 6. It was bet down to 4. So right now, it's definitely a discrepancy there between the two books. 4 all the way up to 5.5 currently. Total opened 44.5 and was bet up to 46. TCU and Iowa State is now at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Rutgers and Wisconsin. DraftKings opened Wisconsin 14. It's now 13.5. Circa opened the game 13. It's still 13. The total opened 48.5. It's still 48.5. Purdue and Iowa. DraftKings opened the game Iowa 5. It's now Iowa 4. Circa opened the game Iowa 4. It's now 3. Looks like it's coming in on Purdue here. The total opened 36.5. It was bet up to 41. Purdue and Iowa is now at 12:30, 3:30 Eastern, 12:30 Pacific. Fresno State and Wyoming. DraftKings opened Fresno State 4. It's now Fresno State 6. Circa opened Fresno State 7. It's now 5.5. So it's 5.5 or 6. Total opened 45.5 in Fresno State, Wyoming. It is now 46. Fresno State and Wyoming is now at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Colorado State and Utah State. Utah State opened 4. It was bet down to 2.5. Colorado State and Utah State opened total 62.5. It is now 64.5. Colorado State and Utah State is now at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. San Jose State and Boise State. Boise State opened 7. It was bet down to 6.5. San Jose and Boise State total opened 57.5, and it's still 57.5. San Jose State and Boise State is now at 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific. Arizona and USC. DraftKings opened USC 22. It's still 22. Circa opened the game 20, and it was bet up to 22. The total for Arizona and USC opened 75.5, and it was bet down to 73. Arizona State and USC is now at 10:30 Eastern, 7:30 Pacific. Colorado and Arizona State. DraftKings opened at Colorado 6.5. It's still 6.5. Circa opened the game Colorado 4, and it was bet up to 5.5. So it's 5.5 or 6.5. Colorado Arizona State total opened 62.5. It is now 59.5. Colorado and Arizona State is now at 12:30 Eastern. Colorado Arizona State is now at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 3:30 p.m. Pacific. Washington State at UCLA. DraftKings opened UCLA 4. It's now 3 minus 120. Circa opened the game 3 where it stayed 3. The total has been the biggest mover so far on the board. The total opened 67.5. It has been bet all the way down to 60. Oregon State and Cal. DraftKings opened at 8. It's still 8. Circa opened at 8. It's still 8. The total opened 51.5. It is now 53.5. Oregon State and Cal is now at 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. Texas Tech and Baylor. Baylor opened at DraftKings 3. It's now down to 2. Circa opened the game Baylor 2. It's now Baylor 1. The move here is on Texas Tech. The total opened 59.5. It is now 57.5. Texas Tech and Baylor is now at 8 Eastern and 5 Pacific. Arkansas State and Troy. Troy opened 15. It's been bet up to 16. Arkansas State and Troy total opened 52.5. It's now 52.5. Arkansas State and Troy is now at 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. South Alabama and UL Monroe. South Alabama opened 10. It's been bet to 11. South Alabama Monroe total opened 52.5, and that's where it stays, 52.5. South Alabama and Monroe is now at 7 Eastern and 4 Pacific. Arkansas and Ole Miss. DraftKings opened Ole Miss 11.5. It was bet up to 12.5. Circa opened the game 9. It's now 13, and it just moved to 13 at DraftKings. Ole Miss minus 13. The total's been a big mover to the under. It opened 68.5. It is now down to 63. Arkansas State and Mississippi is now at 7:30 Eastern and 4:30 Pacific. Western Michigan and Mississippi State. Mississippi State opened 19. It is now Mississippi State 21. The total opened 55.5 for Western Michigan, Mississippi State, and it is now 58.5. Alabama, Western Michigan and Mississippi State is now at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. Alabama and Texas A&M. Alabama opened at DraftKings 3.5. It's still pretty much 3.5. Circa did open the game 4. It was bet down to 3.5. The total for Alabama and A&M opened 48.5. It is now 49.5. Connecticut and Rice. Rice opened minus 10. It was bet up to minus 12. The total for Connecticut and Rice opened 47.5. It has been bet up to 50.5. Connecticut and Rice is now at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific. Old Dominion and Southern Miss. Southern Miss opened 3 at Circa, it's still 3. Old Dominion Southern Miss total opened 53.5, it's now 58.5. Old Dominion and Southern Miss is now at 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific. South Florida and UAB. UAB opened -2. It is now South Florida -2. The total opened 65.5. It is now bet down to 65. Repeating that, UAB opened -2 at home. South Florida is now -2 on the road. Michigan and Minnesota. DraftKings opened Michigan -18.5. It was bet up to 19.5. Circa opened at 18. It's now 20. So the moves on Michigan here. Total in Michigan and Minnesota opened 48.5. It's still 48.5. Michigan and Minnesota is at 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific. Last game on the board. Texas State and Louisiana. Louisiana opened a pick. They are now 2.5. Total opened 68.5, and it is now 67 in the Texas State Louisiana game. All right, that's a look at all the betting lines for college football action. Let me give just a cursory glance. I don't want much dead air here, but if we can just see if there's been any significant movement on any of those numbers that we have just recited, then maybe we can give that out. Starting at the back of the top of the board, Jacksonville State and Middle Tennessee is now down to 51.5 off that opener of 55.5. New Mexico State has been bet up now from 4 to as high as 5.5. The total also is up to 51.5. Florida International, New Mexico State. Western Kentucky has been bet all the way down to 7 now. The action's on Louisiana Tech so far. They're taking Tech. Kansas State now is up to 11. That one opened as low as 9 at a couple places. The total on Kansas State and Oklahoma State opened 54.5 is now up to 55. Nebraska and Illinois. That total opened 41.5. It is now 44.5. Nebraska and Illinois. Marshall and NC State. The total opened 46.5. It's now 47. Syracuse and North Carolina. It opened 7.5, went to 8. It's now 8.5. Toledo and Massachusetts. Massachusetts opened 17, now up to 20. Boston College and Georgia. Georgia's back down to 15. Kentucky and Georgia. Kentucky and Georgia. Georgia's back down to 15. Georgia Tech and Miami. The total is back down to 59.5 there. The spread is kind of settling at 18.5 there in that one. Here's LSU and Missouri. It looks like it's up to 7 now. LSU 7 at Circa. The total is open 64.5. It's now 62.5 at Circa. Oklahoma and Texas. This one's down to 5.5, now 4.5. Looks like 4.5's mostly for the big Oklahoma Texas game. This total now is down to 58.5, open 62.5. Maryland and Ohio State. This one climbs again on the total, up 2 more points to 56.5. The move is on the over here, 4 points so far in this one. Ohio State and Maryland starting to show the line here, mostly 18.5, 19.5, 18. Looks like Maryland might be taking some action here. Ohio State was as high as 20. Now they're down to 18 at Circa. TCU and Iowa State. Mostly looking at a 5.5 right now. Total here is way up to 50. 4 more points it's moved. It's moved 5.5 points to the over here so far. TCU and Iowa State. Rutgers and Wisconsin. Total here is down a point to 47.5 from 48.5. Fresno State, Wyoming. This line is all the way down to 5.5 and 6s right now. The total's up to 47 though, open 45.5. Colorado State and Utah. This one opened Utah State 4. It is now a pick'em. Total opened 62.5. We reported to 64.5. It's now 66. The move is on Colorado State and the over. San Jose State and Boise. Back to 7 for Boise. Arizona State and USC, this total continues to drop. We reported from 75.5 to 73, now down to 72. Washington State and UCLA, this total is down to 58.5 after opening 67.5. It's down 9 full points so far off that week opener by Circa. Oregon State, they're up to 9 now. They opened 8 pretty much everywhere, but now we're seeing 9s. We're seeing 8.5 at DraftKings. The moves on Oregon State here. Texas Tech and Baylor looks like it's settling about 1.5, 2. Arkansas State total up 0.5 point to 53. South Alabama and Monroe total drops 0.5 point to 52. Arkansas and Mississippi total drops another 0.5 point, open 68.5 down to 62.5. Western Michigan and Mississippi State now up to 22, opened 19. Alabama and A&M, that totals up to 50 now, open 48.5. Looks like it's going to settle in at 3.5 for Bama. Connecticut and Rice, it's back down to 10.5. Buyback on Connecticut here, but the total's up to 51 off the opener of 47.5. And that might do it. Here's UAB, South Florida and UAB up to 66.5 on the total. Minnesota's down 0.5 point. Michigan, Minnesota, 48.5 down to 48. That might do it. See if there's any other dramatic turn here on anything, and that'll wrap you up and send you on your way to monitor the lines for the rest of the week. They bought back that 11, it looks like, on Oklahoma State. And I think that will get us out of here. All right. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Take a look at the early college opening lines. I think we got the most out of it. All right. Appreciate it. Catch you back with my morning steam show this week. Live programming tomorrow. We'll be back on 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 Pacific. Very, very short card. Maybe we'll kick off some of this college football coverage. Take a look at some of these games. Try to get on some of these early moves here for the week. Also, programming resuming tomorrow. Midday plays. 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, and also the drive-through with the Pick Dogs crew and Tony, 6 p.m. Pacific, 3 p.m. 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, here on the Tony Picks YouTube channel. Thank you for joining me. Appreciate it. This has been the College Football Opening Line Report. I'm Ramon Scott.